Dishonored, immersive sim greatness inspired by late 19th century London, Edinburgh and the Mediterranean. Have you played it? If not, should you? After all, the series is finished, dead, buried. Microsoft has made sure of that. Is it worth picking up? Should you put newer games aside to prioritise what seems to be a relic of the past? In this video, I'm going to tell you why Dishonored is one of my favourite series in gaming and why you should probably play it even if it doesn't seem like your kind of thing. Let's begin. Dishonored 1 came out in 2012 for PC, PS3 and Xbox 360, with PS4 and Xbox One versions coming later. It follows a silent protagonist, Corvo Attano, in his quest to avenge the death of Empress Jessamine Caldwin, rescue her daughter Emily, and clear his name after he was blamed for the murder. It's a first-person action-adventure game with a focus on stealth and being able to progress through levels in many different ways. It was developed by Arcane Studios and published by Bethesda Softworks. The original inspiration for the game was the Thief series, which also features first-person stealth, exploration, and emergent gameplay. Anyway, here's a fun fact. When they started out, Arcane wanted to set Dishonored in medieval Japan. That would have made a neat change, but they realised that none of them had enough knowledge of medieval Japan, so they scrapped the idea and went with London during 1666. Fair enough. As they began to add more futuristic technology, however, they decided that it was straying too far from a historical depiction of the city, and so they changed it to a fictional one instead, inspired by London and Edinburgh during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They kept the idea of a devastating plague ripping through the population, spread by rats, which is similar to the Great Plague of London that happened between 1665 and 1666. Dishonored is bursting with story and lore. It feels like once the shackles of history were removed, they had the freedom to go absolutely wild. Dunwall, capital city of Bristol in the Empire of the Isles, is the main setting here, and it feels so real. Everywhere you go, every character you speak to grounds you in this bleak whale punk setting in a way that few other games manage. Yeah, you heard me right, I said whale punk. What the heck does that mean? Well, instead of steam powering marvels of technology, the Empire of the Isles uses whale oil, and it allows for things like walls of light, tall boys, and everyday things like lamps. The deep focus on storytelling and lore is one of the reasons I adore this game and its sequel. Corvo's journey to bring the Empress's killers to justice is gripping, and there are twists and turns you might not expect. Characters are brought to life by people like Chloe Grace Moretz, Susan Sarandon, Michael Madsen, Lena Headey, and even Carrie Fisher. Carrie Fisher plays the voice over loudspeakers, and only if you get rid of the original guy near the end of the game, but still. How they managed to get so many big names I have absolutely no idea, but they're here and they're pretty damn good. Now let's get onto the gameplay. And hoo boy, there's a lot of it. Dishonored features levels that act more like mini open worlds, which I guess nowadays you might call wide linear. There are many paths you can take to get around obstacles, NPCs you can choose to speak to or ignore, and collectibles to find that boost your abilities. Every level has a unique feel, with each one taking place in a different part of Dunwall. I won't spoil them all, but yes, there is a party level, and we all know that party levels in stealth assassination games are just peak gameplay. If I could compare Dishonored to a more recent example, it would be Hitman, specifically the World of Assassination Trilogy. If you've played those games and you loved them, you will love Dishonored. I mentioned abilities, and this is where a supernatural aspect comes into play. Corvo is visited by a being called the Outsider at the beginning of the story, who grants him the power to draw on something called the Void to perform feats beyond mere mortals. Blink is the first of these, and it's probably the one you'll use the most. It's a teleport power basically. You aim where you want to go and you go there. There's a limit to how far, of course, but that can be upgraded with runes, which are one of the collectibles I mentioned earlier. Corvo can also find bone charms to passively bolster his attack, defense and agility. And the game even gives you a special item to help you find these things. A heart. Yes, a heart. One that speaks to you, gives you details about the level you're in, and if you point it at NPCs, it can tell you some of their secrets.
He was in prison for 5 years, then changed his name to
Don't worry, those Bottle Street boys had no idea.
Cool, right? But it can also point you in the direction of runes and bone charms, which makes finding them way more fun than it is tedious. While I'm on the subject of collectibles, Corvo can pick up items that are worth money, either by stealing them from people's houses or pickpocketing NPCs on the streets. They are instantly converted into coins, so no need to worry about selling them manually. Very handy. Those coins can then be used to buy upgrades for Corvo's equipment and ammo for his weapons, either at in-level vendors or back at the Hound Pits pub, which serves as the main hub. Most levels contain a target that you must either assassinate or dispatch non-lethally, and this tails in nicely to the chaos system. You can play the entire game without killing a single NPC or main target, and without getting detected. If you do so, the ending you get will be more positive, more hopeful. However, if you decide to play the game crossbow blazing, you'll get a darker ending that fits your horrid actions. This makes for some truly interesting scenarios, where it might be easier to take out enemies by laying down a spring razor, for example, and letting them run straight into it. But if you want to create a more hopeful Dunwall, perhaps it's best to sneak past, send them to sleep by choking them unconscious, or hit them with sleep darts. This is one area that Dishonored could be stronger at, to be fair. There are many ways to dispatch enemies lethally, but there are not a lot of ways you can do so non-lethally. It's still incredibly fun to play the game as an undetected shadow, but you'll always be tempted by the massive amount of tools in your arsenal, which I suppose is probably the point. It takes true restraint and resilience to get through the game this way, and when you reach the end, you deserve to give yourself a pat on the back. Dishonored received 2 DLC expansions after launch, the Knife of Dunwall and the Brigmore Witches. Both contain 4 levels each, have the same level of freedom, and are just as important to the overall Dishonored storyline as the main game is. Now, I don't want to spoil too much more about this masterpiece, but I will say that it's one of the most immersive experiences I've ever had in gaming. Play it with headphones, listen to the chatter of NPCs, take in that disgusting Dunwall air, and let yourself be whisked away to a land of conspiracy and intrigue. But should you play it even if you don't like stealth games? The answer is yes. Yes, yes, yes. Give it a chance. Like I said, you don't have to be stealthy, you could just blaze your way to victory, and if you've seen videos by Stealth Gamer BR, you'll know that it's quite a sight to behold. But for me, Dishonored was the gateway that got me into stealth games. It opened my eyes to why it's such a compelling genre, and I really think it might do that for some of you as well. It doesn't even feel like it's aged much. The controls are tight and fluid, at least on PC, and the visuals are stylized in a way that has kind of protected them from the ravages of time. Please give this one a go. There is a high chance you won't regret it. And if you liked what you've just seen, check this out. Dishonored 2, released in 2016 for PC, PS4 and Xbox One. This is a direct sequel to Dishonored 1, taking place 15 years later. Now, as it is a sequel, I will try to avoid some spoilers from the first game. What I can't avoid is telling you that both Corvo Attano and Emily Caldwin are here in the sequel. While the first game only lets you play as Corvo, this time you have the choice between him and the grown-up daughter of Empress Jessamine, who you were trying to rescue in the first game. While Dishonored 2 doesn't take your choices from the first game into account, it does have multiple references that imply the events of Dishonored 1 are canonically a mix of high and low chaos, which I think is a good compromise. Here, Emily has taken her mother's place as the Empress of the Isles, but she is betrayed by one of her subjects, the Duke of Serkonos, played by none other than Vincent D'Onofrio. Serkonos is another island of the Empire, and one where you'll be spending the majority of the time exploring. It's based on the Mediterranean, so the atmosphere is quite different to Dunwall. I enjoy it though, and it brings even more depth to the world that this series takes place in. It still has that cool whale punk aesthetic, just with a sunnier climate. I do think I prefer Dunwall overall, but it might just be because I'm, British, and I'm kind of biased. In addition to Vincent D'Onofrio, the game also employs the voice talents of Rosario Dawson, Pedro Pascal, and more, who are just as entertaining as the actors from the first game. Like I said, you can choose to play as Corvo or Emily, but once you make that choice, it's locked in. You can't choose between them at free will as you progress, and the reason for that will become clear if you decide to play. Both of them have the opportunity to use the Outsiders' gifts, and they have different abilities depending on who you've chosen. Corvo's are mostly the same as the first game, but if you choose Emily, you get to play with some cool new tricks. The big thing for this game, however, is that you can choose to reject the Outsider and go through the entire game without access to any powers at all. Right, full disclosure here, I haven't actually tried that myself. I love using the powers too much. But the option is there, and it's awesome. How many other games give you this amount of freedom aside from RPGs? Dishonored 2's levels are built exactly like those from Dishonored 1. You can explore them to find collectibles and discover many paths to reach your goals. There are NPCs you can interact with or ignore, and a ton of lore to digest. I'd say that the levels in this game contain more complex ideas than the first game, and there's one that's become quite well known because of how mind-bending it can be. The chaos system is back, and once again, the ending of the game changes depending on whether you are a merciless killer or a more forgiving force for justice. Dishonored 2 gives more opportunities for non-lethal gameplay as well, including the ability to drop on enemies from above and knock them out, choke them to sleep mid-fight, or use other gadgets in non-lethal ways. It's far more balanced than the first game in that respect. Once again, you can get through the entire game without killing a single character or being detected, and you should congratulate yourself if you manage to do so, but it's made just a little bit easier this time, and I do appreciate that. Now, if you choose to go the high chaos route, oh boy. One thing this game has is voice acting for your chosen protagonist, so yes, Corvo does have a voice this time, and that's cool. He sounds great, but so does Emily, and if you're going around destroying your foes without mercy, her ambient dialogue will change to become more... I'm struggling to think of a better descriptor than evil. Listen to this.
Perhaps we need an 8th stricture. Defy your empress and be burned alive.
That's insane. The heart returns, and this time it will absolutely chastise you for acting mercilessly.
Killed without thought or reason. Slaughtered without remorse. This path of yours leads you astray.
It'll also praise you for being merciful. I think that's pretty cool. Gives some extra depth. And yes, just like the first game, it will point out runes and bone charms that you can find in the environments. Once again, I don't want to spoil too much more of this game, but the bottom line is that Dishonored 2 is just as good as Dishonored 1, and if you loved the first game, you'll probably love the second. The controls are still fluid, the graphics are still timeless, and the immersion is immense. You might remember me saying that Dishonored 1 had 2 DLC expansions after launch. Arcane Studios did plan to do something similar with Dishonored 2, but it ballooned into a standalone game of its own called Dishonored: Death of the Outsider. This is a similar situation to Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, if you've ever played that, whereby the game is smaller but still significant enough that it could be called a separate game in its own right, built on the foundation of the previous one. This time, your protagonist is Megan Foster, a character introduced in Dishonored 2, played by Rosario Dawson. She's looking for someone very important to her, I won't spoil who, and this same person whisks her along on a journey that concludes what Arcane calls the Caldwin Saga. The story that began with Dishonored 1 ends here, and it does so in a generally satisfying way, I think. Does the outsider actually die? Well, you have to play it to find out. I'm not going to tell you. Death of the Outsider doesn't contain any void powers. Wait, what? Yeah, you heard me right. Instead of giving you the choice to reject the outsider's powers, this time there is no choice. You just don't get them. But don't worry, the levels are built around this limitation, and Megan has a bunch of tools in her arsenal that make up for it. It's a really fun experience, and the levels are just as intricate as you would expect from the series. What makes the game even more fun is the removal of the chaos system. You can be lethal or non-lethal, but it will not affect the tone of the ending, so it's really all down to personal preference. It's a freeing experience that might finally tempt hardcore low chaos players into taking the lethal option for once. Death of the Outsider is a much shorter experience than Dishonored 1 or 2, but you should definitely play it to conclude the story and tie a nice little bow on things. And sadly, that's it. Those are all the Dishonored games. There is technically another game set in the same world called Deathloop, but that's a whole different experience, so I won't be covering it in this video. I said at the beginning that Microsoft has made sure Dishonored won't be continued, and that's because Arcane Austin, who developed Redfall, was shut down just as they were discussing their ideas for Dishonored 3. It's entirely possible that Arcane Lyon could start development on it after their Blade game releases, but I'm not sure it'll ever happen. Because the sad truth is that Dishonored is not a high-selling franchise. It did not do nearly as well as it deserved. Some people see it described as a stealth series and run away, but hopefully I've shown you that it's so much more than that. It's immersive like no other series in gaming, and has such a ridiculous amount of lore that you could fill a tome with it. You can go in crossbow blazing or be a shadow in the night. It's totally up to you, and that's what makes it a masterpiece. Please, if you haven't played any of the games in this series, give them a chance. You might just discover something wonderful. But that's it for me. If you liked the video or found it helpful, please don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content in a similar style. Also, if I've forgotten any other cool things about the Dishonored series, please leave a comment below and let us know. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.